Thanks for tuning into Duck Bricks. I'm Chris, and today we're going to be taking a closer look at the brand new gimmick sets for LEGO Ninjago Dragons Rising, Kai's Dragon Power Flip, Nia's Dragon Power Drift, and Lloyd's Dragon Power Spin. These are utilizing a new version of Spinjitzu, where LEGO has created a brand new ball-bearing piece that is as frictionless as possible to allow for the most spins, drifts, and being able to flip, apparently. And it's a really interesting setup, and I'm very curious how these stack up next to some of the other LEGO Ninjago Spinjitzu gimmicks, so we'll be doing some comparisons throughout the video as well. And so, definitely stay tuned to Duck Bricks for reviews of not only these, but also all of the other LEGO Ninjago Dragons Rising sets coming your way very soon, if not already. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's jump in to the reviews. Alright, so here we have the three brand new LEGO Ninjago Dragon Power Spinjitzu gimmicks. Set number 71777 is Kai's Dragon Power Flip, retailing for $11 US and 10 euros, coming with 72 pieces. 71778 is Nia's Dragon Power Drift, coming with 57 pieces and the same price. And 71779 is Lloyd's Dragon Power Spin, coming with 56 pieces for, of course, the same price. Now, these introduce a brand new gimmick that is used not just throughout these spinners, but also throughout some of the mainline sets, such as Jane's race car has a spinner element integrated using these exact same sockets. Of course, a lot of the other dragons, like the Heatwave Dragon, the Elemental Dragon versus Empress Mech, and the Temple of the Dragon Energy Cores all include different colored versions of these elements, and they serve as both functional but also collectible aspects of the wave. They are slightly larger than Bionicle Zammerspheres, they roll really well, and they're actually dual molded, which doesn't come across super well on camera for some of these, but I will say aesthetically speaking, these look really cool. Especially for the ones used in the individual spinners, the Dragon Orbs are a combination mold of opalescent or slightly satin sparkly colored plastic being used in conjunction with golden inner cores, and of course with transparent plastic on the outside, which just looks really cool, and honestly, in terms of aesthetics, I actually really do like the look and feel of these spinners. Now, throughout this video, we're kind of having this broken up into two parts. The first part will be sharing my thoughts on these sets in particular, talking about the value, the functionality, how well they work, demonstrating them, and the second half of the video will be showcasing how they compare against some of the older gimmicks from Ninjago's history, where I've brought over a representative sample of every single type of Ninjago gimmick, starting all the way back where things began with a blast from the past. So stay tuned to that part of the video if you want to see that, and if you just want to jump to that and you want to skip my thoughts on these, it is also linked in the timestamp in the description below. But now, let's talk about how these work. Each of the sets comes with one core concept. Lloyd's is focused on spinning, Kai's is focused on spinning and flipping, and Nia's is focused on drifting, aka going forwards and backwards. This is achieved because essentially these are meant to be omnidirectional wheels. LEGO has put a lot of development effort, I can assume, into making these, which are essentially ideally supposed to be frictionless ball joint sockets here, which allow you to, in the perfect world, and notice I'm saying in the perfect world, not just spin them around, but also roll them forwards and backwards based on just the movement of the wheels alone. And in theory, that is a really cool idea, because that opens up so many different possibilities with what you can even do with these. Obviously, there is the standard spinning, but you also could actually have them work like a car. You could design vehicles with these wheels. If these are as frictionless as they are intended to be, that is something really cool. Of course, much like many other gimmicks, there are a ton of other side builds to really just be there to knock over and interact with. Each of these comes with three of the main colored dragon cores: transparent orange for Kai, transparent green for Lloyd, and transparent blue for Nia, of course mixed in with that satin and gold color. But they also come with a clear and gold orb, which is, I guess, supposed to be one of the main collectibles of the wave, each featured on some sort of a pedestal. Kai's is atop a pillar of fire, Lloyd's is on top of an energy rock, I don't really know what to call that, and Nia's is in a little half meteorite, but also surrounded by transparent round 1x1 studs, which provides a very satisfying and large explosion when knocked down. Accompanying them are, I guess, little villain builds. These are supposed to represent some of the forces from Imperium. They have the color scheme of Imperium. I do not know if they are supposed to be training droids or if they are actual robots that will appear in the show itself, but they have the Imperium color scheme, the black, the gold, and the transparent orange, and each of them has a little either spinner or microphone on the bottom of them, which allows you to kind of play around with them and rotate them, and so they'll also spin while they're being knocked over. Lastly, there are these little colored element pieces included on each of these spinners as well, which are meant to be toppled over and just kind of add to the scenery. But let's be honest, everyone is just curious, not about these, but really just about how these spinners themselves work. You can probably imagine and picture how these work in your mind. I mean, we can leave one here to be knocked around, but we really just want to see these spinners in action. So I'm going to set aside the Dragon Energy Cores for now because they are going to go crazy and roll all over the place, and let's just focus in on these spinners themselves. So starting off with the most basic one, we have Lloyd's. So Lloyd's here is the spin one because he has a slightly elevated bottom. So actually none of the wheels really do ever touch the ground. Maybe at some points one of them is touching or the other one, but for the most part they're supposed to be elevated off of the ground itself, and that way when you do the spin they basically just serve as more weight rather than actual movements to convey. So I feel like this is kind of cheating because he does have an extra piece on the bottom, so any spin is just by balancing on this piece and not really utilizing the action feature, but we're getting there for some of the others. So the way this works is you take them by their heads and you give them a good old spin, and that's how that goes. So the unfortunate thing about this is that the way that the masks are set up is that when you spin them by the head, they do have a propensity to just knock the headpiece off like that. Like when you spin this, it just kind of pops off of the head. Obviously you can maybe grasp the figure around, but that's a little bit awkward. Like you can kind of go like that, but I feel like I can't get as good of a spin as I want because every time I do it, as you can see, the headpiece will just pop out because the harder you spin it, the more likely it is to pop out. Now Lloyd's is unfortunately probably the most successful when it comes to spinning, and you can probably imagine that does not bode well for the future ones. And again, that's because it doesn't actually make use of the gimmick itself, which is utilizing the ball wheels to roll. It is almost entirely just elevated above the ground. Unfortunately, there isn't enough weight. It doesn't really act like a true spinner, so you can have it spin around for a little bit, but again, we're going to be doing some comparisons later on in the video. The spin is not that much. Now we can move on to Kai's though, and I think Kai's is really a clear demonstrator of how this is supposed to work, because there is not an extra piece underneath Kai's. Note how Lloyd has an extra tile underneath his, or an extra plate there. Kai does not, so this one truly is supposed to use the omnidirectional wheels to actually spin around. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Yeah, so that's what that looks like. I mean, we can do it one more time. That was a little better that time, but you can see that unfortunately these just simply don't really spin as much as I was expecting them to do. Now Kai's is the Dragon Power Flip, so what you're supposed to do is you're also supposed to be able to flip him like that, but that's not really like part of the gimmick. I guess that's really what you're supposed to do with Kai's, but I wish that you could do it while spinning. I think it would be really cool if while spinning you could like maybe time it so that you can hit it and do a flip while spinning so it can flip in the air. I have not been successful when trying this, like I just can't actually hit it right. I mean, we can try this a couple more times and I'm gonna... Okay, so really what you're supposed to do is, again, you're just supposed to take this and do a flip. Now, the issue is the figure does tend to pop out when you're actually accomplishing said flip, so if I want to do that one more time, let's see if I can do it without getting the figure to pop out. It is a fine balance between doing it hard enough to actually flip, but also soft enough so the figure doesn't fly out. Okay, maybe that's not super possible. I'm curious to hear what other folks think of the success in terms of how these work, but there you can see that this did not honestly have a ton of spin to it, and the thing is that the way that this was initially set up, I tried to spin it, and it basically did not spin at all. There was no movement. It spun like this much and stopped, and I was like, okay, something's got to be wrong. And I realized that completely out of the box, you actually have to loosen the friction between these spinners themselves to get them to work. I spent like 15 minutes just going like this, popping it in and out of the socket to manually loosen the socket to even get it to the point where each of the balls is spinning as good as they do now. Because out of the box, they do not actually spin well at all. And I think that definitely has to do with tolerances in manufacturing. Obviously, these are really, really hard to have to manufacture. You have to really get the right tolerance to make it such that they do spin, but they also do not just fall out, so it is a very hard balance. But unfortunately, I feel like LEGO did not quite hit that balance right, where, as you can see, for even some like this is not spinning freely. If you want a truly freely spinning, frictionless omnidirectional wheel, I should be able to go like this and have the ball keep spinning in any direction. Instead, it kind of just stops. Like, as you can see, it stops spinning as soon as I let go. Obviously, there are maybe like some ways that you can get it better, and I think this socket's loosened up. One of the sockets is loosened up more. Like this one feels the most loose, where, okay, like see, this one's more loose than the others, so this one is spinning at least a little bit more when I let my finger go, but then again, you would want to have an equal amount of frictionless spin on all of these ball socket gimbal joints to be able to actually allow you to move it around omnidirectionally. Now, one thing I did try is I said, okay, what if I remove this piece and I just try to kind of roll it around like this? Maybe this is causing some friction. But that actually made it worse because I realized that this piece was actually bearing most of the brunt in terms of allowing it to spin around. In fact, the only reason why it was spinning so much was that this was kind of lifting it off the ground a little bit. So you have to have that piece, which kind of leaves you with a weird gimmick that honestly just doesn't work that well and is kind of disappointing to me. I was a little bit sad with this because when I saw images, I was super excited. I was thinking, wow, this is a really cool type of gimmick. I'm quite interested in how this would function, and the answer was not very well, to be completely honest. However, things do not really fully fall apart until we get to Nia's. And Nia's, the intent is not to spin it. I mean, you can spin it if you want to, but it really is supposed to be a drift. You're supposed to treat this almost like a platform, like a car, or a wave that she is riding. So you put your finger here, and you kind of just are supposed to push it forwards. But it doesn't really work. Like, let's try it again. It is sliding forwards, yes, like that is sliding forwards, but it's sliding forwards as much as any Lego piece would slide forwards if I pushed it. Like, let's take this random piece, for example. I'm gonna push it. Like, that slid. Actually, that slid more than the thing intended to slide, and that was just by me, like, flicking it. Like, I can flick a Lego piece across and, like, have it slide, but I don't think that was really the intended gimmick behind it. And the reason behind this is because the way this is set up is that you're supposed to have basically all three of the balls acting as wheels. But as you can see when I'm rolling it along, there are points where some of them will just stop rolling. Like, I'm rolling it here, and none of them really are rolling. Like, I kind of have to lift it off the ground and just rest it gently to even have some roll. But press down with the weight of the figure, this, like, the balls are not rolling. Sometimes they are. Like, this one rolled a little bit. The back one's rolling pretty well because I loosened that one up a lot. But it just doesn't quite work as well as I think they had intended it, and that's a little disappointing because, again, spent a lot of time loosening these up. Like, I really tried, okay, like, maybe I got, like, a defective one, maybe I need to just loosen these balls up and sockets more and just allow it to be a bit more easy to move. So I went like this for a lot of time, and that helped. Like, it definitely helped. Like, it is sliding across the ground now. Before it wasn't. It is, like, sliding now, but I don't think this is exactly what they had in mind, and I'm really curious what the designers kind of were trying to do with this, if theirs play tested any differently, because obviously this is a brand new gimmick. I assume they did a lot of play tests, they had kids test it and see how they respond to it, but it just isn't working that well for me. I mean, maybe you're supposed to like hit it like that. The amount of slide that you get, like there is some slide, but I think most of it is just because I'm sliding it on the boat stud on the bottom and on this smooth piece, and less about these balls actually rolling, which is what is supposed to happen. So overall, these gimmicks are kind of weird. I feel like they simply don't work that well, and it's kind of strange because obviously a lot of development effort went into them. I assume that LEGO playtested these to some amount of significant degree before putting them on shelves, but the one that works the best is Lloyd's, and that's because it doesn't actually use the gimmick. Like, you can see when I'm spinning it, the balls are not touching the ground. When Kai's do touch the ground, it kind of works, like you can get some amount of spin, but it's nowhere near as much as I was personally expecting, especially compared to older Ninjago gimmicks. And here's the thing. Aesthetically, I think these look really cool. The Dragon Energy cores are a cool collectible. These are really interesting LEGO pieces. I think they have a lot of potential as different unique collectibles. You can see the gold inside there, the nice kind of opalescent type of satin color in the blend of the transparent green. Drop that for a second, but getting that back here, that looks really cool. And the pieces used for the gimmick themselves are interesting and they're well designed. I think this is probably the most successful frictionless piece that LEGO has ever designed. Like, it looks pretty cool, it works fairly well, but it's when they're at certain angles. Like, as you can see, this is spinning really well when it's vertical. So they have it spinning well when vertical. Like, this is spinning quite well, actually, but then as soon as you turn it horizontal, the way it's supposed to be spun, the ball sinks lower due to gravity and it just doesn't spin as well, especially in certain directions. This direction spins fine. This direction, not at all. And to have a spinner not work in a certain direction is not really a good thing for a spinner to have. So I definitely feel like this could have used a few more months in the test planning phase of trying to figure out getting those tolerances right. I understand this is a crazy engineering challenge. I mean, getting somewhat frictionless ball and socket pieces to work as well as these do with the types of tolerances LEGO is working with is very impressive. I have to say that. It is very impressive. But at the end of the day, I'm just not a huge fan of how they turned out in terms of the gimmicks. They're honestly a little bit disappointing to me. Aesthetically, they look cool. I love the minifigures, and we'll take a look at the minifigures right now, but I definitely feel they could have improved how they work. Now, setting aside these spinners and just taking a look at the minifigures, obviously I did a full minifigure mega review just recently, so if you do want to see that, do go check it out on my channel where I went much more in-depth into the figures, but you can see the individual ones here. They all have transparent arms. Lloyd uses transparent green arms, which I think look really cool. We got one transparent green arm in a Europe and Asia exclusive LEGO Video Series 2 blind box minifigure back in the day, but this is the first time we are getting both transparent green arms, and for most audience members, this will be the first time they get to interact with them. Here is what the torso looks like without anything attached. You have Lloyd's symbol in the back surrounded by energy, and for those who have not seen the new heads yet, this is what they look like with new facial expressions for the ninja, which is very, very cool. Moving onwards to the next character, Nia also is using a very similar design. In fact, they all are kind of uniform in the way this is built up. She has a nicely brick-built trident with water, a nice water design on the hood, and then removing the headpiece here, you can see that's what it looks like with a nice, rich, dark blue torso, which I think looks really cool. And there's that headpiece for Nia with a very interesting smile that does not show any teeth, but I think works well for the character. Lastly, the final minifigure here is Kai. He is using the launcher flame blast elements to be able to showcase his fire elemental abilities. Removing these pieces here, you can see the dark red torso with the dragon logo on the front and his symbol on the back. And then the headpiece itself has one expression here and the other expression like this. And again, you can get a much more in-depth look at how I feel about these minifigures, the new armor pieces, and all of that in my minifigures mega review. But now I think it's time to step aside from these particular gimmicks and go into the comparisons of all the gimmicks across the years. Okay, so I think a good way to kind of wrap up this video is by doing a comparison of all the different types of Ninjago gimmicks that we've gotten so far. Obviously, the latest ones are the brand new gimmicks for Ninjago Dragons Rising. These are the specialized new dragon orb pieces. But I wanted to do a quick comparison showcasing some of the many different gimmicks from across Ninjago's multi-year run and talk about how this stacks up compared to the rest of them. So these are not really in any particular order, but they basically encompass every single type of gimmick we've ever gotten from Ninjago. First of all, we have the very first classic spinner from 2011. We have the revamped, updated version of the spinner with attachments on the bottom for 2012. We then jump forwards a few years and go into Air Jitsu in 2015. We have the specialized spinjitzu pieces being used for 2018 Sons of Garmadon. We then have also in 2018 the Airjitsu-esque dragon type of flyers right there, and then we go on to the Secrets of the Forbidden Spinjitzu wave. We have the Forbidden Spinjitzu Slam here, as well as a standard spinner from the Forbidden Spinjitzu wave being used throughout the sets. We also had before that the Ninjago Legacy or Season 10 type of spinner, which was reinventing what Spinjitzu was like. Also for Legacy, we had this little handle spinner that could be used in some of the sets, and then we got for Season 13 Master of the Mountain the Spinjitzu Burst spinners, and most recently we just got these Spinjitzu spinners for Ninjago Core. So there's a lot of different types of spinners here, and really the most relevant ones that we have to actually look at are the ones that, well, are ground-based, because while the Airjitsu ones, the Dragonflyer ones are fun, they're not really good to provide direct comparisons with the latest spinners. So let's just do a quick spin test on all of them and see how they go. Starting off with the good old classics, this is the original spinner for Kai in 2011. The way to spin it is you put both your hands on these two sides and you basically just give it a spin. So this works really well because it actually has some weighted components on the inside of the spinner itself, making it have a very good balance as it continues to rotate around and around. Obviously, this is basically only spinning on just one single turntable on the bottom, but you can see this one really wants to spin. This is what really captured the magic of Ninjago back when it launched in 2011, where it really has a satisfying spin. There is a weight to the spinner itself. Obviously, there are metallic elements being included in the spinners, and there's a special little feature to have the minifigures kind of pop up as they're spinning so they can be more easily knocked off, which is always good for combat. I would say, in my opinion, in terms of ranking all of these different gimmicks, we want to take a look at them in a few different things. How fast does it spin? How satisfying is it to be able to play around with it? Is there good combat possibilities? And is it a fun toy to play with? And while those aren't strict guidelines, they're just points that I do want to consider when taking a look, and I feel like it makes the most sense to talk about those points when looking at the very first 2011 spinners, because LEGO honestly kind of nailed them with these. They work really well, they have a great battle mechanic, putting two of them against each other results in perfect play to see whose minifigure will be knocked off. It takes some amount of skill, but mostly it is luck-based in terms of what weapons you're using and kind of how you're going to hit the opponent at an angle, and this was just a really great one to start us off. Now, 2012 gave us an update in the form of basically a very similar type of spinner. However, they basically just modified the piece to allow you to attach Technic elements to the underside, which was a cool adjustment to the piece, allowing you to have a whole different range of weaponry both on the bottom. They also slightly changed the way the mold attaches on the top, so you could actually attach different pieces onto it, and introduce these spinner crowns, which functionally don't really do much, but do actually give a different added layer of aesthetics on top of these spinners. These work pretty much in the same exact way. You take the two sides and you give it a good old spin, except this one is a little bit different because of course you have those specialized blades being used on the bottom, so you have a bit of a different look while it's spinning. Of course, it's really satisfying to see the blades just furl outwards when you're spinning itself, and then they can kind of collapse back into the spinner. Now, obviously these add a little bit more friction, so maybe the spin isn't quite as good as the original ones with these added on, but for the most part, these are for all intents and purposes the same exact thing, and they both work just as well together. These are really great spinners, and I feel like LEGO honestly kind of nailed the concept of these spinners here. There is only one downside to these, and that is, aesthetically, they don't really look anything like the show, and we will be keeping that into account as well. Aesthetically, do they make sense in terms of what Spinjitzu looks like in the show? And we're going to be getting there, but these don't really look like tornadoes. In fact, they're kind of the opposite. They're more like spinning bases for the minifigures, whereas tornadoes would be more of an upside-down look. So that is something to consider, but I just wanted to point it out. Otherwise, these are really great to play around with. They work well, they spin fast, and they kind of set the gold standard for Ninjago gimmicks. Now flash forward a few years, and we had Air Jitsu. So Air Jitsu was a very radical concept that required a ton of development effort on LEGO's part to make a minifigure fly. The goal of this was to introduce a brand new gimmick to Ninjago, which was really something that they wanted to take off, literally and metaphorically speaking, and be something super fun to play with for kids of all ages, but especially for younger kids who they wanted to reintroduce to the world of Ninjago. Now, Air Jitsu performed okay, but it definitely wasn't the smash hit the spinners were, and part of that might be because while it was a very fun gimmick that just took all the way off onto my ceiling, it definitely does require a lot more space to play around with. Let me see if I can kind of launch it on that side. Obviously, this isn't a really great thing to be able to be reviewed and photographed because it just shoots straight up into the air, but I'm going to do a little bit of a gentler pull here. And you can see that this continues spinning even when it hits the ground, which is a really great thing to do. Now, the only thing about the Air Jitsu flyers is that, well, they don't really have that much of a battle aspect. The reason why kids gravitated so much towards these spinners in 2011 and 2012 was because you could actually cause them to have discernible outcomes when battling. With Air Jitsu, it is very cool to see the minifigures spinning and flying in the air, but there also isn't that much of a combat aspect to them. Two kids with Air Jitsu flyers won't really have a discernible outcome when they actually have them fighting against each other, because, I mean, maybe you can shoot them into the sky and try to have them hit each other in midair, but it's not quite as satisfying as seeing the minifigure go flying off of a spinner. And because they had to protect the minifigures so much by literally including a protective clear dome around them to be able to even have them fly in the first place, that meant that you don't really have that satisfaction of seeing the minifigure minifigures just be blasted offwards or to be attacked in a certain way, and there's no clear winner. If it's not a competition, it's a little bit less fun. So while it was very fun to launch these into the air, I have a lot of fond memories of during the summertime when these came out, just absolutely yeeting them into the air and watching how high they could go, because these are probably the most successful flying toy that LEGO has ever made, definitely beating out the Bionicle Rotuka spinners. I mean, these just really get great airtime, but there's not a lot of competition to them, and also aesthetics-wise, they honestly look kind of lame. Like, they don't really look that cool. I feel like with the spinners, you had a lot of options for cool customization. Like, you had the crowns and you had the swords at the bottom, and they at least looked pretty cool while flying around and spinning. This looks like a relatively cheaper propeller type of toy. Yes, it does have a minifigure in it, and a lot of design effort went into making this, but it doesn't quite have the cool factor that these spinners had, and I think that did add to its downfall. Moving onwards to the next gimmick here, they basically reused the exact style of Airjitsu launcher in 2018 for the Sons of Garmadon spinners. These were intended to be more like road type of play pieces, where you can see that mine is kind of scuffed up on the corners because I did actually play with it as intended, where what you're supposed to do is you take this and you kind of just let it fly offwards, and this spins incredibly fast. You can see just how fast this is spinning. It is taking the Airjitsu gimmick, using the exact same launchers, but essentially making them just spinners. And they work really well. They look pretty cool. I mean, they kind of have a similar look to the original spinners, just much larger and around the waist, and they can actually also act in different ways. A lot of the times when they're encouraging kids to play with these, they were trying to get people to make them like wheels. Like, for example, you could really just get this going and let it roll on the side like so, and just have it be launched in a particular direction. So these are really cool because you can actually have them go really far, whereas the spinners were more combat focused. These were more about traversing long distances, which is a really interesting gimmick to have for a Ninjago thing. Of course, if you don't want to use the launcher, you can also just spin it with your hands. Just go like this, and you can give it a good old spin, like so. But again, the thing missing with these gimmicks was the competitive aspect. There isn't really a competition here. You can watch them spin, and it's really good for single-player fun, where you can actually just take your minifigures, load them up in the spinners, and launch them, and they go like crazy. Like, this spins really fast. Let's see that one more time. Like, that is a pretty crazy spin. That's already with a lot of friction from it hitting the walls. So they were definitely really fun to play around with spinning-wise, and they look really good even spinning on camera. But again, the thing is, not a ton of competition here, so maybe that's why these didn't really take off the same way that the original spinners did. And yet LEGO continued to try to recapture the magic, so after giving it a little bit of a break for this type of spinner for a little bit of time, they actually returned later on in the year in 2018 with another flyer gimmick, and these were the Dragon Flyers. So the Dragon Flyers were quite interesting because they basically were just a very similar thing to Airjitsu, except that they had a bit of a different gimmick to them. In fact, let's just take a closer look right here so we can actually see what they have included. These were a little bit more expensive than these standard spinners because they had a lot more going on. The handles were more complex, allowing them to be launched at an angle. You of course have these large vinyl dragon wing pieces, and the point was to be able to do tricks in midair. Unfortunately, these are probably some of the least successful flyers that LEGO has done, because while they are really cool looking to play around with, and obviously getting these specialized vinyl pieces for the wings was very cool, they just simply did not fly that well. I mean, there was a lot of friction to deal with. These specialized Airjitsu elements were mounted on a somewhat frictionless piece right here, but there was still some friction. Like, you could kind of spin it around and see how there would be some friction with it rotating there, and the intent was for the propeller to be able to propel this forwards and the wings to actually act as gliders, but for a lot of the time the wings tended to just slow it down in midair and spin and just cause it to flop to the ground. I definitely think that these could have used a little bit more R&D testing before being fully published out to market. It's a really cool concept, but not one that worked especially well, especially given the context of a lot of the other great looking spinners and gimmicks, which were both functional and also worked like a charm. That being said, they were still a very unique and bold type of gimmick for LEGO to play around with. This was something that was unlike anything we had really seen before from LEGO, and I applaud the effort, but maybe they were not that successful because they don't work that well. Again, there's no competition aspect, and there's even less competition aspect because it's harder to even hit things in midair with these, and they don't even spin when they hit the ground because of the massive dragon tails, so honestly, they're kind of just a worse version of Airjitsu. But moving on from that, LEGO gave it a break for a little bit until kind of going back to basics and trying to figure out what makes a spinner just fun to play with, but also aesthetically interesting. And that's when they landed on what might be aesthetically my favorite spinner from all of Ninjago, which might come as a surprise to some, but that is the Ninjago Legacy 2019 spinners, because these literally look exactly like they do in the show. Let's spin this guy up and see what it looks like. And this time you spin them by their heads, and they had to redesign the hood element to make it not movable, so when you spin their heads do not move. So that's how that goes. Obviously, if you have a bit of a better spin than the one that I did, you'll probably get better results than this. This one's a little bit wobbly, but you can see the general intent behind how these spinners were supposed to work. I really like these because they're really nicely dual molded, they have a really unique design to them, and they look exactly like how these Spinjitzu tornadoes look like in the show. These are what people mostly use for stop action and stuff like that to depict the ninja doing Spinjitzu, because they just simply look really good. They look just like the tornadoes in the show. Even if you remove the minifigure, like this looks like a Spinjitzu tornado when it's spinning around. That just looks really cool. It looks like how you would see a tornado of Spinjitzu in the show, and I feel like they've never really gotten to this point, even to this day, in terms of show accuracy. Of course, there was a little bit of a battle gimmick here where you're supposed to kind of, I guess, knock over your opponent, but it's not quite as fun as the original spinners would have the minifigures actually popping out, because obviously, it's kind of a catch-22. If they want to make them look like a show, they have to be in tornadoes, and with tornadoes, you're not going to have minifigures popping out of them because they're protected on all sides. They did have a little bit of a building thing with having some clips on the side here so you could attach different pieces to them and cause them to at least impact the fight or the battle somewhat, but I definitely feel like these aesthetically look the best. Play was average. I think some of the other gimmicks were more fun to play with and more fun to watch spin, and obviously the competitive aspect wasn't really there for these. It was a step up from Airjitsu and the Dragon Flyers, but a step below the standard spinners in terms of that. These ones definitely do win by aesthetics. Now, we got several variations on that for the next wave, 2019 bringing us the Secrets of the Forbidden Spinjitzu wave as well, where we got a slightly remolded spinner, which was also supposed to kind of look like how it does in the show, but honestly, I kind of prefer this look because you have the two different colors streaking throughout. You have the red and the transparent orange here. Here it's more of a very clear split of red on the bottom, transparent orange on the top, where I definitely feel like they looked a little bit better with that color going all the way through the spinner. Now these work in the exact same way where you take their heads and you give them a spin, and they can spin like that, where you can clearly see the color gradient and the color differentiation between them. That's maybe about to fall off, yep. But you can see that's essentially how that worked there, with different types of colors being used for the top and the bottom. These were used for the Season 11 Secrets of the Forbidden Spinjitzu wave. That was an awful spin. Oh my goodness, let's try that one more time. Yeah, again, you can see it's a little bit more difficult to get a good spin on these. I don't know what I did to get a good spin for the first one, because it is just not cooperating. Wow, let's try that one more time. Okay, like, we're kind of getting a wobbly spin there, but that was how these ones worked. Again, not really super fun for the competitive play aspect. It's kind of harder to aim these because you have to spin them by the head, but they did the job just fine for stuff included in sets. Also, for Secrets of the Forbidden Spinjitzu, though, we got these things, which were really interesting types of launching gimmicks, where you actually had Spinjitzu Slam being one of the main points here, where you actually slam down on a button and then launch them outwards. So, here's how this one works. Well, maybe I should remove his Forbidden Spinjitzu weapon there. I have him displayed with that piece because that's what the minifigure is supposed to be using when using the spinner, but let's remove the weapons and try that one more time. There we go. So that's how this is supposed to work, where you can see you have a really nice spin on it. It is a lot of fun to just watch spin around and play with, and I think this was a really good gimmick in terms of being able to actually launch the minifigures. The only thing is that, again, that competitive aspect was missing. We did not have the same type of fun competitiveness for this type of gimmick compared to any of the other spinners, and that was definitely something that was, I think, a missed opportunity for Ninjago to be able to try to do another competitive gimmick. It's really fun to see them spin, but also you're missing out on the competitive play. Although I do think they do look pretty good in terms of being accurate to the show itself, in terms of how tornadoes look. Moving on from that, there was also one other gimmick included in the 2019 Legacy sets of that year, and that was this right here. It is a super simple gimmick, but how it works is that there is a rubber ball at the end, and you just kind of roll it along the ground, and you can have a minifigure spin like this. So that's a really fun thing to be able to pose minifigures, especially if you do not have a pre-existing spinner. I like that they included this in a ton of sets just to be able to play with minifigures. This is actually pretty fun, and if you have 2 of these, there is a good amount of competitive play that you can do by just trying to see who can knock the minifigures off of each other. Obviously, though, it doesn't look as cool as any of the other gimmicks. It is on a handle, so it's not really free-flowing spinning. You have to control it. But the nice thing is that you could just take some of the spinners, remove the bottom part of it, and then mount the spinners onto here. So if you really also wanted to get these ones having more of a controlled spin, you could do that as well, which was a really great part of this piece. Still, I think that this was a fun gimmick to include in sets. Definitely would not have supported its own line of spinner style of gimmicks, but it was a fun thing to have once in a while. Moving on from that one, LEGO decided to not really give us any more gimmicks until the Master of the Mountain Wave. That was when we got Spinjitzu Burst all the way back in 2020. So this is a Spinjitzu Burst gimmick, and the way this works is really, it doesn't really make sense in the canon of the show. Only Cole does the Spinjitzu Burst, but I took out all the Kai ones because Kai has the most consistent spread of different types of gimmicks throughout Ninjago. Is you use the same slam mechanism, but you slam it here, and the way the slam is supposed to work is that you've got the elemental burst elements that kind of fold outwards. They're controlled by a rubber band, so let me try that one more time and see if we can showcase that. It is supposed to almost feel like the elements are bursting off the character. Let's see if we can get a more violent push here. Okay, well maybe not quite like that. That just absolutely went flying. The different pieces just split up. But I think you can see the general intent is to try to have the burst elements actually burst around the minifigure itself. So they're kind of burst outwards like so. Let's just get that focused up here. Yeah, so we have the burst elements, and you're supposed to have them burst outwards like this. So you have more of a burst type of elemental attack, and then they fold up around the spinner. The annoying thing, though, is that the rubber bands were blue, and honestly, that kind of ruins the aesthetics of what they were supposed to go for. I honestly don't think it looks that bad, except for the fact that the rubber bands are just blue around the edges. I feel like it kind of ruins a lot of the different types of aesthetics here. These ones also were really prone to the minifigures just, as you saw, bursting out of them, which I don't think was really the intent, because if you want to make the burst look good, you have to slam on it pretty hard, but if you slam on it too hard, the minifigure's just gonna fall out. Like, that one was a pretty controlled slam, and we didn't get that much of a burst, but the minifigure stayed in. These don't work that well. They're kind of strange gimmicks. Honestly, probably some of my least favorite gimmicks, just aesthetically speaking, play speaking. They don't have a lot going for them, because the blue rubber band messes with the aesthetics. They don't work that well. There's not a ton of fun play to have with it. It was a cool concept to have a frictionless elemental burst, but personally, just not really my thing. Lastly, they took a bit of a hiatus until 2021, where we got a new style of spinner for the Ninjago core sets. Now, this is somewhat similar to the previous types of gimmicks, although it introduces several different new molds, which essentially allow you to pull the ripcord. Oh, let's just get that on camera this time, and have the spinner just spin from the top part, which, let's see if we can get that. Okay, move around here. Okay, so that's what that looks like, which I think from the bottom looks okay, but it is very clear that there is a black element on the top that is essentially just the part where you control the spin. So honestly, I feel like aesthetically speaking, this is a really weird one to judge because it looks good from the bottom, but then you get to the top and it looks kind of awkward. So this one is, in my opinion, a little bit mixed. Now, the cool thing about these is that they do kind of look like Spinjitzu, at least from the bottom. They did come with the exclusive minifigs. You can spin them by hand if you want to, although you, of course, will get much better results when you do use the actual spinning piece. And they did actually have a whole set that was developed to playing around with this concept, although that set honestly didn't work that well. Overall, these are kind of middle of the road. I guess there is some competitive aspect to being able to launch these at each other. There's not a ton of competitiveness that you can do here. It's just you can play around with them, and the minifigures won't go flying, obviously, because they're using a similar type of swirling cage as they did for Airjitsu. I do like how they have this kind of spinning type of piece molded into the clear cage now, so at least you do kind of look like the figure is spinning. But overall, these ones are a little bit aesthetically strange and not really the best. I think the best were still, probably aesthetically speaking, these ones, the 2018 ones, really, really good, or 2019 ones, really good for aesthetics, and the ones that work the best are still those good old original spinners. But now that brings us to 2023, and Ninjago is back with a whole new gimmick, and that is this. So these are the Dragon's Rising Spinners, and they make use of a brand new energy core element. Obviously, we just took a look at all of the other gimmicks, and you can probably guess where this is going, but yeah, let's just see that one more time. Again, that spins, but then you have the headpiece that doesn't really come out all that well, so you have to kind of spin them by the body. And they spin, but I would honestly say these have the least success in spinning compared to any of the other gimmicks. Like, trying that one more time. That is not a very satisfying spin. I mean, if you put a side-by-side comparison, I'm gonna give this one a head start because I don't think it needs it. I'm gonna give it a kind of a delay here, so I'm gonna start spinning this standard spinner here, and in this spinner, and I think you can really see the difference here, where the original spinners just work so well, there's little friction in them, but these, I don't know, they are not the best. Look, I even hit that one and it's still going. So I definitely feel like these could have just used a little bit more time in R&D to really just improve the function of them. On their own, the idea of having kind of this omnidirectional frictionless wheel is a really smart one. I like the concept of having omnidirectional wheels being used for spinners, but if they don't work that well and if there's too much friction, then I guess what's even the point? I don't want to be too harsh on them because, I mean, they're still kind of fun to play with, but I think kids will be a little disappointed in the amount of spin that you achieve here, because I'm really trying, I'm trying different ways. Okay, let's see if I can really get this spun up by going around the sides. Like, that is, I think, the most successful spin I will ever get with this. And that was, I had to go on the sides and be really careful about spinning it and kind of handle it with my hands. Yeah, so that's maybe the best way to do it. But even then, that's like a couple seconds of spin as compared to the original spinners and a lot of the other spinners where it's super easy to actuate and they just go. Like, look at the Ninja going. And compared to the newer ones, I think the older ones are still far superior. Aesthetically, these look kind of cool. Like, I kind of like the look of these. I think having the orbs surrounding the ninja is a cool concept. It just looks kind of fun to be able to have those different stylized pieces. The minifigures obviously are great. I do love the minifigures, as we talked about earlier in the review. It's just the way that they work is a little bit disappointing, and that's all there is to it. And with that, honestly, we've about summed up our look at all of the different Ninjago gimmicks from around the years. I wanted this video to be both a review of the new ones, but also be a showcase of how gimmicks have changed over the years. I definitely feel that they could have just spent a little bit more time in the R&D department when making these brand new spinners. They had the potential to be really interesting and really cool gimmicks, but still to this day, I don't think Ninjago has ever given us a spinner that was as good as the OGs. And this is not nostalgia talking. I mean, as you can see here, we just did a performance review, and objectively speaking, the OG ones basically knock it out of the park in pretty much every single category. They are the best in terms of being able to spin fast. They are the best in being able to have a competitive play aspect. They are the best in looking cool and being able to actually activate different types of functions and increase creativity. Sure, there are some that maybe look better in terms of the show, like the 2019 Legacy ones. There are pros and cons to all of them, right? These ones look really good for comparing it to the show itself. Obviously, these ones, which are activated by the hand crank, don't look that good, but they spin really well, and the slam ones do actually get some amount of spin, but also don't really have that much play features to them. But I feel like the perfect gimmick is something that kids can actually make a competition out of. And they can only really do that with the OG spinners, which is why those ones, I think, are taking the crown on this one. But it's been really cool to be able to compare these, and I hope you got something out of this video by being able to take a look at all the different gimmicks that Ninjago has done over the years. Alright, and with that, we have summed up our look at each of the 3 brand new LEGO Ninjago Spinjitzu gimmick sets. These retail for around $11 to $12 US. It is a really interesting new gimmick, but to be honest, I don't think they were quite as smooth as I thought they would be, so I'm really curious to see what other folks' opinions are, especially once these become available for sale. With that, we've summed up this video. Thank you all so much for tuning into Duck Bricks. Like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming away very soon, and bye for now.